Hello, everyone. Day 2 of Kong Summit. So today we're here to talk about developer experience. As Chuck sort of mentioned, our users of products and services are really the core of everything that we do, and ensuring they have a positive experience is really integral to the success of any organization. So as mentioned, I'm UX designer here at Kong. Anything experience design is very near and dear to my heart. So we have some really excellent panelists today to come and talk about how best to empower our users. So without further ado, Mimi Nguyen, how about you come on out? She is an awesome creative writer and technical writer from Century. Next, we have our very own Greg Schier. Come on out. Creator of Insomnia. And we have Erin McKean here, the creator of the world's largest online dictionary, and Adam Zimman from Launch Starkly. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you
Happy
for
to be
having us.
here.
So developer experience means so many different things to different people. I would love to hear some of your thoughts, some of your experiences on, great experiences and not so great things that you've encountered over the years. Do you want to go ahead, Mimi?
Yeah, sure. For me, I'm constantly looking at open source projects and wondering where I'm going to give, my free work. I'm going to volunteer. And the first thing I always look at is the code of conduct. Because for me, as a developer, I'm like, I'm going to help you out. But I need to know that you're going to make sure I'm comfortable and safe. So I think baseline, just make sure you have an environment that is welcoming to everyone and showing that you've actually thought about it and that you care and that there's a place of belonging for as many people as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I come at it from a similar perspective because I deal a lot with open source, and that's all about community. But typically, my experience has been, again, create a welcoming place for people to be able to contribute and ask questions, but also design a product that is easy to use for everybody and not just developers. Because I think oftentimes we might think of developers as more advanced than the regular user, but they're just like everybody else. Like, you need a simple product for them to use, and yeah, they're just people.
Developers, they're just like us.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I recently had an excellent experience as a developer with a large payment processing platform that begins with S. And, and they generally have excellent docs, but I couldn't find the answer to my question in their docs, so I hit up their chat, and this was like a Sunday afternoon, and I didn't get my answer right away, but what I did get, which was amazing for my experience, was straight up validation that the question I had was not in the docs. And just like letting developers know and not giving them the runaround when they find a problem, that kind of like transparency goes a long way towards making a good experience, because you can't hide forever.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, from my perspective, some of the best experiences that I've had as a developer are along the same lines. It's how am I, engaged as an individual, both by the product, by the documentation, by that kind of, overall engagement from initial awareness all the way through to use of the technology, to make sure that if I have any challenges, there's a very obvious way for me to get assistance. And when I'm using it, it feels ergonomically thoughtful, right? It feels like it's something that someone put some thought in not only what it could do, but how I, as a user, would consume it.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of consuming, so Mimi, doc team writer of one at Century, I've taken a look at those docs and I found them very easy to consume. So congratulations on that.
Oh, I love hearing that because I think they need so much work.
They always need work. They absolutely
Continuous
always need
improvement.
Yes, absolutely. So what is your experience with that, and how do you kind of manage requests that come in? I also would love to hear from you, Greg, about that too, about doing community-driven development. We'll start with you, Mimi.
Yeah, for sure. So kind of like what everyone was saying earlier, I am often advocating for beginners or people who just haven't even really thought about our product before. And it's funny because most of the people who help me with writing the documentation are engineers. And so there's a lot of assumed knowledge or just like kind of almost forgetting what it's like to be a beginner. So most of my time is saying things like, listen, I know how to make your job easier, and it's if you help me help the people that you're kind of forgetting right now. And so far, it's been great. Like, I think in general, everybody wants to bring in more people to read the documentation and consume the documentation. But just like any startup, being a department of one has its challenges. But at the same time, I get to like flex my muscle whenever I want, and I really love doing that.
I think, sorry, go ahead. That's a really excellent point, because the absence of beginner information shuts out beginners. The presence of beginner information does not dissuade advanced people. Nobody ever looks at a recipe and says, oh my goodness, you're going to tell me how to separate an egg white and an egg yolk? This is garbage, right? And moves on. Like, you have to start where people are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Absolutely.
I like to, there's a term, progressive enhancement, which I think I really love. And it reminds me of that because, yeah, you provide people with the basics, and the people who want to be more advanced can do that on their own almost. But yeah, providing that beginner experience is really crucial. And I think for open source, it's nice because it's just an extra channel for people to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
So especially for docs, I think providing as many channels as possible for people to get help, and then sort of taking all that feedback that you get and putting it in one place so that people can search it and find it on their own.
Yeah, common source of truth is very
Yeah.
important. Glad that you brought up open source, of course, very important. Building a community is very core to the success of any sort of open source product. Adam, I would love to hear from you if you have any tips or learnings on building a diverse and inclusive community.
Absolutely. I think this is something that is especially valuable in open source, but extends to other software communities as well, is you really need to think as the individual or group that is managing the community about how you can be extraordinarily open to any and all comments that are coming in, especially those that are asking questions. If you approach it from the perspective of telling people to go away because they don't have context when they come, to you, or you feel like you are getting a question that is so obvious to you that it is already answered, it is already part of your program, and you kind of retort or respond with that kind of flippant remark, not only are you going to limit the participation, because those individuals will most likely go someplace else or do something else with their time if they're not feeling welcomed. But also, what I've found, especially thinking about things from a product perspective, or from a project perspective in open source, is that oftentimes when someone's asking a question that may already be part of your existing project or platform, there's something else there. Right? And so if you actually respond with a little bit more probing, an understanding of, well, what are you trying to do? What is it that you're trying to, understand a little bit better? How can I engage you on that and understand where they're starting from? It gives you the opportunity to open up to a whole new segment of the community that you maybe aren't speaking well to. Right? And it gives you this opportunity to potentially either restructure your documentation. It gives you the opportunity to potentially look at a new use case that maybe somebody is, coming from a different starting point than your existing community. And that's how you look at building and expanding out, right? If you initially, your response is to close off and say, go away, I don't want to, you're not smart enough to be a developer on my project, then you're going to have a really hard time actually expanding that community and making your overall project or program successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of ties in a bit to, one of the major UX principles is you are not your user, and getting down to the how before the what before the how, not jumping straight to a solution. And one of the ways of doing that is jobs to be done. You mentioned that, Erin, a little bit. I would love to hear your experience with that. That's something that we've been looking to try and get a bit more into.
I love the jobs to be done framework, and I'm completely blanking on the name of the person who came up with it, so y'all have to promise me you're going to go look it up immediately after, so credit can go where credit is due. But it's kind of like people don't necessarily want a car. They want to get from point A to point B. The job to be done is not, I need to own a car. The job to be done is, I need transportation. And so we can see, like recently, a lot of people have decided, I don't need to own a car because other things get the job done.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when people come to your product or your project, you think that they need this thing. Nobody ever needs the thing. They need to do something.
Right.
And it can be really hard when you've invested a lot of time in like building a thing to reframe it as, but what does it do?
Yeah, absolutely.
I often find that a lot of people, I do a lot of email support, and oftentimes people will bring their own solution to the problem, and like you said, instead of describing their problem. So really digging into that, yeah, I think that's really important.
And Greg, how do you sort of filter out some of that noise? I've seen some of those GitHub threads. How do you kind of try and dive into what's important there?
I like to, again, provide a community that's welcome enough and feels involved. So hopefully, if someone has a question and somebody else is just browsing around and they see it, they can feel that they're welcome to answer that. So whenever somebody answers a question, I'll follow up and say thanks for answering that. That's really good, and maybe add a few more details that were missed, just to help open that up. But I think in general, the community, if you guide it in the right direction, the community can sort of filter on its own almost,
Right.
And the bigger issues will bubble up to the top.
Right.
And then you can sort of go around and see if there's anything that they missed. But
I think curiosity is like the developer experience superpower, right? If you can just keep in that tell me more mindset without jumping into I'm going to solve your problem for you, then you eventually get to the point where either their problem is solved or everyone involved realizes that, they're trying to drive a nail in with a screwdriver, and you can send them to your friends over at Hammer Project.
Yeah.
But just if you're not curious about what people are doing with what you've built, you probably either need to develop that or try something else.
Yeah.
Because once you assume, you just close the door.
Yeah, I feel like often those questions are already answered too in the workplace. Like, I love the support team that I work with, and they are literally the front line for documentation. Like, people like to look at me as the expert, and I'm like, that's great, and it makes me feel really good. But actually, the people who know how our customers are interacting with our documentation are the support, and they know the questions that our customers are asking on a regular basis, which are the problems we need to be solving. So let's go talk to support. Let's buy them cake. And they've already done so much of the work for us.
Support does love cake.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
I have bought
cake. On buying cake.
I think that also kind of circling back on your question, Stephanie, around kind of diversity and inclusivity in communities, is that the diversity and inclusion aspect is really important for both sides of the community. And what I mean by that is it's important for having a kind of diverse group that is actually helping to build the product, build the platform, build the project, so that they can actually be more representative of the community they're trying to serve. And it's important to make sure that you are looking to expand into a more diverse community as well, because that's how your project is going to get better. That's how your product is going to get better, is when you start to solicit feedback from individuals that are using it differently, and bringing new things to the table. Otherwise, you end up with just the hammer project, and it's really good at hitting nails, but doesn't do much else.
And no one else will even look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Screwdriver folks, completely left in the dark.
Yeah, and on that, Erin, you and I were speaking about how you have been answering every single customer success email since 2009 for WordNick.
Yes, I have answered the majority, if not all, customer emails since 2009, and
I feel like that deserves a round of applause.
I really like it, even if the sentence I type most in my life is "I'm so sorry for the hassle," because people can just ignore you. That's the default. When they come to you with a problem, they're giving you their trust that they think that you can make it better. And even when my reply is, "No, I'm sorry, we don't actually have this kind of etymological information at the granularity that you would like," they're like, "Okay, great. Thank you for answering my question. At least now I, know." And the thing is that it's never the user's fault. Whatever question they have, no matter how obvious you think it is, you didn't make it clear in your documentation, you didn't make it clear in your implementation, you didn't make it clear somewhere, and that's not on them, that's on you. And every time they ask you a question, it's an opportunity for you to make things better. And then that scales, because hopefully the next person will find the answer on their own. Also, I like to send people stickers. Anytime somebody brings any kind of bug or question to me, I'm like, we like to send stickers to people.
You do have good stickers.
Yeah, I have good stickers.
Very important, very important.
It's a sticker-driven economy, really.
I support that, completely.
Excellent. So a little bit back to, let's see here. Let me look at my notes, everybody. Oh, yes. So, there has been a lot of conversation about tools and softwares and how we're all using a ton of them, and they're all different. You, Greg, have an incredible tool that helps people debug stuff. I'm curious about any other tools that you all might recommend that would improve sort of a developer experience, if there are any, and if not, that's totally fine. If your own pen and paper is all you need, that's great.
Can I start by recommending Sentry?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pretty great.
That's what I was getting at.
Who here uses Sentry? Yeah, there are the hands. Hello. Thanks.
But I think there's a lot of tools that I love, Sentry being one of them, Heroku being probably my other favorite. So when looking at ways to improve the products that I work on, I often just look at other products that are already out there and that exist and sort of see what they're doing and how you basically copy some of those attributes.
Developers, we love pattern matching.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the tool that I'm obsessed with and use constantly is JQ. It's a command line tool for making JSON make you not want to cry. And it's so powerful. It can do everything but make you eggs, essentially. And I can't recommend it enough. And it has pretty good documentation.
Absolutely.
So if you have to deal with JSON, get JQ. It will make your life better.
I think that's the new commercial. I think for me, there are a lot of different tools that I've enjoyed working with as a developer. I think that the thing, though, that I've found to be most impactful from a developer engagement perspective, personally, as well as what we've seen at Launch Darkly, is solid documentation. The ability to have examples of APIs in particular, and so having that intersection between API functionality and example usage is huge. There are a lot of companies that do this extraordinarily well that we try to pattern match off of. I think of Stripe as one that does this extraordinarily well. Twilio is another that really have said, you know what, we're going to take this idea that we've all been talking about of engaging with the individual who literally has never done this before, has no context, and start from there. And then we'll go all the way up to the most advanced use case that we've ever seen and make it something that somebody can actually, kind of take that wherever they're at and move forward. So,
One working example that people can play with is worth 1,000 lines of documentation. I think for APIs especially, looking into Open API spec, the spec formerly known as Swagger,
absolutely.
will get you pretty far. There's a lot of good tooling built up.
Actually, Twilio, I was trying to use it a while ago to hook up something to my doorbell. And I was looking at the docs, and then I did a Google search, and they had an article for almost the exact thing that I was trying to do, step by step.
Right.
So like, even though the docs existed and I could have used them, they went one step further and just showed me how. It was awesome.
Well, we say documentation as it's like this one blob, but there's all different kinds of documentations, right? How-tos, like you found, quick starts,
Oh, yeah.
theoretical.
Yeah, sample code or public repos that you put up on GitHub. I still remember when documentation was oh well, I will deliver you this 15-volume set of paper books that will just sit on your shelf or directly go into the recycling bin. And that's why no one ever read them, because it was really complex to search. You were never going to read them cover to cover. As much as I have many friends who were documentation writers and would write beautiful prose in the documentation, that just wasn't what people use them for. But nowadays, like combination of Google and well thought out and well structured documentation sites, it's amazing how useful that can be for a developer.
Yeah, I feel like in documentation, visual aids are also like so helpful. Like I love a good diagram. But I wanted to bring up a tool to recommend as well, and it's one that's not always brought up in the developer community, and it's Grammarly.
Yes.
We can all be better communicators, and look, there's something that'll sort of help you. Sometimes it's wrong. I do want to say that, like, AI is not quite there yet. I would be out of a job. But yes, please, there is a difference between passive voice and
Active voice.
active voice, thank you. I really wanted to say aggressive voice.
Yeah.
But there's passive voice,
right.
there's passive-aggressive voice.
Right, exactly. But I was just going to say, the two other tools that I love in addition to Grammarly for the writing is the Hemingway app. If you haven't used that, you should absolutely try it. It gives you the ability to actually kind of have an understanding of what grade level your writing is at. So thinking about it in the context of like, how do you actually write something simply? And then the other one is Textio, which gives you amazing insights into how gendered your writing is. And so this is a way of being able to make sure that, like, are your docs overly aggressive? But I think those tools for me have been extraordinarily powerful over the past few years.
They're kind of fun too. Like I really love it when Grammarly will point out that I used an idiom, and I'm like, it's an idiom and we shouldn't be using that, even though our docs are in English, because our docs are actually international and idioms are culturally based. Like one of the ones that I saw in some documentation not too long ago said, roll your own this thing, right? And I was like, where does that come from? Oh, it comes from rolling your own cigarettes, but not all cultures like are cigarette, I don't know, cultures, I don't know how to say that, like have a history of rolling cigarettes. And it's just one of those things, I'm like, I learned something today. Also, take that out of the documentation.
I do want to say, though, that in 99.59% of cases, your writing is good enough. Don't let the fear of somebody nitpicking your writing keep you from creating documentation.
Oh, yeah.
And if you want, you can say, a dictionary editor personally told me my writing was good enough. Yes. If you need that appeal to authority, go for it. Because, if something really isn't clear, people will let you know. And there are plenty of people out there who get an enormous amount of personal satisfaction and joy from telling you that you've misused a comma, and you are bringing such light into their lives by giving them the opportunity to tell you that.
I also like to embrace the nits because I'm like, oh, if you're nitpicking, that means most of this is great. That makes me happy.
But do you think there's a line between bad docs and no docs? Like, can it be so bad that it's worse than having nothing?
If you're like chaotic evil and you're deliberately writing bad docs to like mislead people about how to use your product, then yes, don't do that. Like, you know, I know it's April Fools everywhere on the internet at all times, but like deliberately don't prank your users.
Yeah.
But even like a stopped clock is right twice a day, right? So if you can get somebody to the point of, oh, I've gotten you started, but oh, guess what? We changed our response, and now it doesn't look exactly like this. Most people will understand if a property has changed.
Mm-hmm.
But zero documentation, it's like they're in the middle of like a featureless plane.
Yeah.
They have no idea where to start.
Yeah, and it's really hard to guess.
Yeah, and honestly, they're not going to read the code, even
Yeah.
if it's open. They're not going to invest that time unless you're the only thing in the universe that even purports to do what you're doing.
Exactly. I don't even want to read my own code, so.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So we are wrapping up on time. Documentation, very clearly important for a positive developer experience. Education, you know, I really liked your point about still communicating and writing documentation, or just reaching out even if, you know, you might not be 100% sure of yourself. Community building. Anything else that you all could think about or like to add in the?
Yeah,
Or
I
I
think
missed.
I think that we obviously talked a lot about documentation and kind of the user experience with the product, but I would also say that a huge aspect of the kind of global world we live in is also making sure that you take the time and effort to personally connect and get out and meet with users, with members of the community. So at Launch Darkly, we have a team of developer advocates who are traveling regularly, going to conferences, and they're not doing it for the purpose of selling more Launch Darkly, right? What they're doing is they're trying to engage and really have the primary goal of gathering feedback from how the community is thinking about some of the problem space, some of the problems that we're solving, as well as how they feel about our solution and other solutions that are out there, to be able to understand what is it that they need, what is it that they want, and what is driving them to engage with us. And that is so unbelievably valuable feedback to bring back into the product delivery organization, to bring back into the marketing organization, to bring back into the documentation team, to make sure that when you're sitting behind a desk and the only contact you have is email or chat, it's really easy to ignore the troubles that people are having. Whereas if you get out and you actually have face-to-face conversations, it can be so much more impactful in kind of building empathy and that community.
Could not agree more, and that's actually an excellent plug. We are downstairs. We're trying to get any user feedback that we can on our product as well. So always love to hear from people. It's so valuable.
Thank you so much for moderating.
Yeah, thank you for being such a fantastic panel.
Thank you for being a great audience.